Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to give our hot take review on the two games we just finished playing tonight, and we're going to compare them. The first was Heat, Petal to the Metal, and the second was Downforce. So we'll do kind of a short, normal review format for both of these, and then at the end we'll talk about which one we preferred, how they matched up for us, or I guess who won the race on these two games. But before we jump into those reviews, we got some poll results to discuss. The poll I asked this week on social media, which is similar to what I do every week. But I asked, have you ever attended a game night or board game meetup without knowing anyone else there? And the options I gave were no, too anxious. 21.9% answered that. No, but I would or will. 21.9% answered that. So even up there. Yes, and I didn't like it was 5.4%. And yes, and I had fun was 50.9%. So if you'd like to be involved in these polls in the future, join us on social media. You can find us on Twitter at BG_hot takes or on our Facebook group at Board Game Hot Takes group on Facebook. So let's jump into how did you guys answer this question?
The answer for me is yes. I have gone to game meetups with people I did not know, and it's a little bit of a cheat here because for each of the ones that I'm thinking of, I kind of half knew somebody. There was nobody that I was tight with, nobody that I knew really well, but when I moved out here to Portland, one of the things that I decided to do is sort of throw myself into the game scene to some degree and try to get out there and meet people to game with and hopefully meet some cool folks to be friends with. And so that's kind of what I did. And I've had 3 different groups that I gamed with now that I had some connection to. I had some reason to get into it. For example, there was one guy that I had met once before and then said, "Hey, you're a gamer. I had this group that I game with. Why don't you come out and, join us sometime?" And then I did, and it was absolutely, absolutely wonderful. And that's happened to me a couple times. So I got a couple of groups that I've done that with. And, at least my experience of gamers is that they're just so thrilled to have another person to join the game night that everybody's cool, everybody's fun, everybody's happy, everybody's enjoying the same hobby. And so I give a unequivocal 2 thumbs up for going and joining a game night, even if you don't know anybody.
Yeah, I agree. I've done it several times. In fact, I met Adam through one of these game days where I showed up at a game day that I didn't know anyone else there and just got to chatting with him before the doors opened and we all walked in there. And so look what came out of that. But I've done this several times, always had a pretty good time with it. I will say that I do have a little bit of anxiety going into these things, not knowing anybody. And I have some tips. So once we get through Adam's answer and some responses from some of our listeners, I do have some tips on things that might make this a little bit easier for you in the future that have worked really well for me. But I've had a lot of fun with it. I've met some really cool people, a lot of interesting and nice people, a lot of people that are not great to game with as well. But you can usually find your way around those. You can navigate those labyrinths and find some fun in these events, I think, if you try. So I would recommend doing it. What about you, Adam?
Like you said, Tim, we met at one of these kind of groups. I've gone to a couple, so it can be super anxiety inducing. The first group I went to was just through meetup.com. And it was a gaming group in Orange County at some guy's house. So I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to go? Am I not going to go? It's weird. It's at this guy's house. But you know what? He wouldn't open his house if he wasn't expecting new people to be there. So he was super welcoming, super inviting. There was snacks there, hang out, have a good time. There's a couple of people came right up to me and said, "Hey, let's go. You want to play this game with us? My name's blah, blah, blah. And my name's blah, blah." It ended up being a great time. So I'm glad I got over that anxiety and took the first step there. And then there was a group here in Long Beach. And that's where I ended up meeting Tim. Again, I didn't know anybody there, but went to that one a few times, again, pre-COVID, and then it shut down. And yeah, you go once to one of these groups that you don't know anybody, and that's the only time you don't know anybody. Second time you go, you're going to have some familiar faces there, and it gets easier each time, and you remember the game and a couple memories and make some jokes about how nervous you were the first time you were there, and it gets better and better and easier to do it subsequent times. So I'm glad I did go to some of these meetups where I didn't know anybody, and I ended up having a good time at all of them.
And after hearing you guys both give your answers on this, I feel like I do need to add, it's not like I went into those game nights with no social anxiety. I am huge on social anxiety, and we're talking like cold sweats and
Yeah.
lots of nerves. So I didn't mean to give the impression of like, oh yeah, Mr. Suave gamer guy. I go anywhere the wind blows me. Yes, lots of social anxiety, lots of nerves going into a situation where you don't know anybody. So that I totally appreciate.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I think if you know me, that you would think that I probably don't worry too much about that. I mean, I deal with I deal with a lot of people I don't know. I get on big sales calls and meetings at work. I can present in front of a room of 100 people and feel pretty comfortable about it. But even in this situation, it's like walking into a space. Is there going to be a game that I want to play? Is there going to be people that are going to invite me to that game? Is there going to be is there going to be any open games, or am I going to walk in and just stand by myself for 30 minutes while the first games are finishing up or whatever? I didn't know what I was walking into in every case. And I think all of them, I ended up finding some fun in the situation. So I think we all must suffer from that, or most people do to some extent.
Yeah. One thing with the meetup that was nice is there's you'd say, hey, I'd like to, you can chat ahead of time. Once you log in and stuff, there's a little text chat. You can kind of introduce yourself on there and say, hey, I'm thinking about coming. Is there a spot for me? What games are people going to play? What should I be ready for? Can I bring anything? And you can kind of introduce yourself like that and get to know some people, some faces even before you show up. So that was a kind of nice way to get in a foot in the door as well.
Well, Adam, you just stole my thunder. I was telling you I was going to give some tips at the end of this. And that's honestly, I'm glad you called that, because that is the most important thing you can do. If you're going to go to one of these events and you can communicate in advance, what I've done is drop a note. Hey, I'm going to bring this game. Does anyone want to join me in a game? And every time it's like 4 or 5 people. Yeah, I'd love to. One time I did where I just like, hey guys, this is like, 4 or 5 games that I have and I'd love to teach. And then a couple people reached out and were like, yeah, I want to try Dune Imperium. I want to play Dwellings of Eldervale. And they kind of let me know in advance what games they were interested in. And so we kind of had a game already set up. So I think if you do that, if you just reach out in advance and either say, what are people playing? And then ask to get into one of those games, or offer to teach a game and bring something, you'll find a group that'll work out really well. So here's how some people responded on Twitter and on Facebook. Sarah Green, who's one of the co-hosts of Board Game Barbecue, said, yes, I get social anxiety though, so it was hard. The first game I played with complete strangers, Spyfall, and I was the spy 3 times in a row. I was sweating. Lying to strangers is hard, but still friends with a lot of those folks today. Wow, yeah, that is a rougher situation. Spyfall, probably my least favorite social deduction game of all time, and playing it with strangers, that's pretty rough. Sky Larson, the co-designer of Paperback Adventures, said, my full answer would be, I was quite anxious, but yes, and I had fun. I'll always prefer a game night with friends over something like playing with strangers at a convention, but both can end up fun. Luke Holt said, I felt kind of snobby, but I went to one and there was so many people, we just ended up playing simple games, which isn't my favorite. Playing simple stuff with close friends is fun because you can just chat and goof off. Always prefer a close group of friends, but if I know what game is being played beforehand, I'll meet with strangers. Yeah, I think if you're going to go to a place and they're going to be like, yeah, we got 16 people, what's the one game we can all play together? I think you're in for some very light party-ish games, but most of these meetups are going to have like a number of tables. So, 3, 4, 5 people at a table. So you don't really have to worry about that. And then Sarah Reed said, unfortunately, we did it once and it didn't go well. We didn't show up right when it started, so everybody was already in games and no one greeted us either. It was very awkward and discouraging, so we left.
Wow.
Every other meetup, we've made sure to know at least one person there. Yeah, that's really frustrating. I mean, the people at that meetup should have welcomed you. They should have said, hey, as soon as we get done with this game, let's get into something else. So that was definitely a miss on their part. But like I said before, reach out in advance, try to connect, plan for a game. Also, really good idea to show up on time so that you're not missing out on those games if you don't know who's going to be there, what's playing. So
true, but still a major hosting failure there. If you're a host of something like that, you at least say, hey, sorry, we're already in the middle of games right now, but hey, come join us, or maybe we can find someone who wants to play something else, short with you and whatever. But that's depressing.
Yeah, totally. All right, cool. Well, let's jump into our first game, which is Heat, Petal to the Metal. And we'll start with a short description and then get into some conversation about it.
In Heat, Pedal to the Metal, up to 6 players take the wheel of a race car and manage the straightaways, tricky corners, and engine temperature in a retro-era racing circuit. In the base game, players will manage their hand of cards, initially playing up to 4 of these cards each round. Most cards contain a number from the set of whole numbers between 0 and 5 inclusive, and their sum indicates the distance your car will move that turn. After this initial play, Players can then react. Should I push the engine a little extra and risk overheating for a surge of movement ahead on the track? Did I stay in a low gear so that now I can discard useless heat from my hand back to my engine to spend later? Or often in my case, am I in last place and now given the woeful adrenaline bonus for a free movement and additional cooling? After resolving positions, players now have the option to draft off adjacent cars, granting them an additional 2 movement ahead on the track. Finally, if racers rounded a corner that turn, they must check for a spin out. If racers came in over the ideal corner speed, they must pay a malus of heat from their engine to their discard pile. Can't afford the heat? In that case, your car spins out and resets back prior to the corner with no heat and added stress cards. Navigate the corners, manage your heat, take calculated risks, and cross the finish line first to win heat. Pedal to the metal. I've breezed over some of the details, but hopefully I've given enough to get you to the checkered flag for our little review. Heat, Pedal to the Metal, was designed by Asger Harding Granerud and Daniel Skjold Peterson, with art by Vincent Dutray, and was released in 2022 by Days of Wonder.
All right, welcome back. So let's jump into the gameplay and mechanisms of Heat and Pedal to the Metal.
So, Heat, Pedal to the Metal. Now, actually, I'm saying that half jokingly because this is a game that really does kind of need that the colon and the subtitle because, Heat doesn't really tell you a whole lot. Anyway, this game, interesting mechanisms in this game. I had never played a game like this before. I've never played a racing game, and I know you guys talked about a couple of them while we were playing. And it struck me as an interesting combination of deck builder along with, I don't know, a whole bunch of other things. But the deck building in this game, you have these cards that are essentially your speed, and each card is going to have a number anywhere between 0 and 5. And you're playing these cards, and you play how many cards based on the gear that you're in, and then that adds up to how far you get to go. So that was kind of cool. It's kind of light deck building in the sense that, or not even deck building. You're not building a deck. You have a deck that you're recycling and you're adding some heat cards to it, but you're manipulating your deck to try to get yourself into the right spots. And I think probably the most impactful part of this was the corners. That kind of goes without saying, I think, because really what you're trying to do is you're trying to get yourself into position so that you can maximize the forward movement to get to a corner but not go through it, because the corners are where you potentially spin out. Because if you go over the speed limit allowed for a particular corner, then you either have to spend your very valuable heat cards or you have to spin out, and nobody wants that. So at least to me, the story of this game was sort of manipulating the cards you're playing to get yourself right to the right spot at the corner at the right time so that you can get through it and then take off on the other side.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, so this was all three of us played for the first time tonight, but Adam and I have both played I think the designer of this had also made the game Flamme Rouge, which is a bicycle racing game. And it's got a lot of similar mechanisms here. So to start, we had a little experience there. I think Adam and I were both kind of mediocre on Flamme Rouge as far as my concern with it. And I'm going to start there because I want to explain how this changed. But my problem with Flamme Rouge is that you had these decks of cards, and mostly you didn't really have any control. When you played the cards, you might get the bonus of drafting off a card or something like that, but there wasn't a lot of strategic decisions to make here. Sometimes you got lucky, got some drafting out of it. Most of the time, everyone's going to end up pretty close. The race, it never feels very impactful. So the first half of this game, there's a couple things that changed. Like Chris mentioned, the heat mechanism here is, I think, why they named it like this, because it's probably the most interesting and most unique part of this game. You've got this engine heat stack of 6 cards at the start of the game. You can spend that to get some extra bonus movements, random bonus movements. You can also spend it if you go around a corner too fast. You can spend that heat to survive and not spin out. So it's an interesting mechanism to play around with. And at the start of the game, I felt like that did enough with Flamme, like to change what Flamme Rouge was, to make me feel like I was having some fun decisions, that I had some interesting choices to make and things like that. So I think it did add. I think this game is a step above Flamme Rouge, and I'm glad of what it added. Beyond that, though, I'm not sure that it added enough. And, I'll get more to that in my final thoughts, but it still felt like by the end of the game, everyone's playing through the same deck of cards. You might have an opportunity to get a little bit ahead on a corner versus drafting, but it almost felt the same over the course of the game. Like how you ran into those corners, what cards you got to get you up to there, or how much you pushed over them, still wasn't enough, I think, impactful to make me feel like the game, you really had a big payoff for all the work you put into it. I'm way ahead of myself there. Adam, what did you think? Give us some thoughts on your mechanisms here.
So yeah, what stood out, you guys have touched on this. I'm going to specify it a little bit with the hand management aspect of it. You're really trying to time your hand, keep the cards you need for the moments, the corners specifically that you need the low number cards to navigate right around those corners and maybe draft, getting a good position to draft when you can. So the big thing was hand management. Along with that here, I thought there was a little aspect of memory. Oh shoot, did I already play the 4 and the 3? Are these 5s over here that I can't even use these 5s yet? I kind of want to save those 5s for the straightaway, or the little onesie twosies that I need, because you have this option for this card pull. And you're going to try to remember, like, are the 1s and 2s in here that I need right now? Or is my deck hot for 3s and 4s that I really need? So there's a little bit of that memory aspect that goes in the hand management. And then the other part of this was, you want to keep those bigger numbers for the straightaways, and you want to get just around the corner so you have those big numbers so you can accelerate and get the timing just right with that gear mechanism, Chris. You have the gears 1 through 4. So I thought the hand management combined with the gear mechanism and saving your heat or spending your heat, there was a little bit interesting there. So I thought that part of the game stood out for sure.
There was also some interesting stuff happening with the order of activities within the turn, because for a game that seems relatively light on its face, there's actually a number of things you have to factor in a number of phases to each turn. There's the initial phase where everybody kind of picks their gear and how many cards they're going to play, and then throws down that many cards, and they don't reveal them right away. Everybody reveals their cards as it becomes their turn. But then you go into this whole series of kind of optional or potential actions that are going to happen depending on the board state at the time, and then you end with drawing back up to your 7 card hand. And it includes a few different things. It includes the ability to add heat to draw another card, or to, if you're the last player, you have the opportunity to move up and take an extra space. Or if you have the ability to draft, if you're in the right position, you can take an extra 2 spaces. And all of these things interact in different ways. So for example, with drafting, you get those 2 movements, but they're free. They don't add to your speed. And speed, again, is incredibly important for the corners where you're going to end up spinning out or slowing down, or having all kinds of important things happening. But if you're last and you get that extra, what they called an adrenaline move, then that does increase your speed. So for example, at the end of this game, we were kind of all clumped up and it was really tight. And there was an opportunity where I pulled up right behind Tim at the last corner before the straightaway that led to home. And the fact that I was able to draft off of him, that put me right around the corner and put me in a position where the next turn I could go all out and not have to worry about anything with the corner in the final turn. I was able to do that because of the fact that drafting, those 2 extra spaces, put me around the turn, but didn't actually add anything to my speed. Because if they had added to my speed, I would have burned up too much heat and I would have spun out. But as it stood, I was able to draw down most of my heat and still have 1 left over, which I ended up actually having to use in the final turn. But there were these little bits of strategy that kind of poked their head out. Like a lot of the time, it felt like you're just throwing down cards like move fast, go get where you wanted to go. But especially trying to game those little inter-turn phases, there was some interesting stuff happening there, I thought.
I think where the most fun was in this game was when you were pushing your luck. There was a number of ways to do that. One was anytime you just played one of those stress cards out of your hand, which just pulled a random card off the top of the deck. And sometimes it was just the random draw. Oh, I want a 4. Nope, I just drew a 1. So it's still a fun thing that was happening. But what is really fun is when you're coming up to a corner and you're like, I need a 3 or less, but there's 3 4s in my deck. And if I pull a 4, then it's it's going to really mess me up. At best, I'm just going to burn some heat. At worst, I might spin out. And so every time somebody did something where you're pulling a random card off your deck, we're all watching, we're all excited, we're all cheering when it goes right or wrong or whatever. So fun moments there. But let's talk about the spin out mechanism here a little bit, because I think this is where you're really pushing your luck. You're going too fast around the corner, you use all the heat out of your engine, and you still can't pay for it all, then you're going to spin out. And what that means, you go back behind the corner, you no longer have any heat, you add extra stress cards to your hand. It only happened a couple times in the game, usually towards the end when we really had to push our luck towards the end. The only problem with it, I thought, was that all of that was fine. The fact that you went back a couple steps was fine. The fact that you burned some of your heat was fine. But the problem was, I think that you burned all your heat, which meant that you had no opportunity to take those extra risks on the next turns. And when we came to the end of the game and I spun out and was right in the end way, you guys were able to catch up because of that. Cool. That made a fun situation. But unfortunately, it meant that I actually had no chance of actually taking that extra heat to move extra cards. And in fact, I tried to go through the corner again, took a little risk and spun out again because I didn't even have any heat to burn on it. So I think it's not a problem that there's a push your luck and that if you lose, maybe it's going to set you back. But I think you would have had a chance to come back in a surprise moment if it was like lose all your heat except one, keep one heat in there. So you at least have something you could do. But with no heat in there, it was just such a major setback that it felt too punishing. What did you guys think about that? Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I feel like the fun is pushing your luck. But if you push your luck and fail, and then all of a sudden you're out of the game, like that doesn't feel fun anymore.
Yeah, when you're out of heat in your engine, it felt like you're really hosed. You really limited your options. So, Tim, I think you kind of nailed it. If you didn't have any heat, you're just like, I got to stay conservative now, and I can't really do much. So hopefully this works out. And there was a lot of times where I wanted to draw heat in my hand because I was in that first or second gear so I could get it back in. And I knew my deck had. So like near the end of the game, one of my draws was 4 heat cards. And I had, I've been searching for those the whole rest of the game to try to get those out and back into my engine. And it was just, I just got hammered by I think it was in third gear at that time. I was really limited on options because of a bad draw, is what I'll say. And people can say, no, you didn't manage your hand well, Adam. Dude, you got to figure it out. But I didn't think there was much I could do, and my options were slim.
I think that's usually what Tim says. I don't know how to answer that question, Tim, because I don't feel like I pushed my luck a whole lot in this game. I feel like I pushed it exactly one time, and that was at the very beginning of the game, and I almost immediately spun out, but fortunately I was able to burn like most of my heat and then regain it over the course of the rest of the game. But for the rest of that game, I was also playing pretty conservatively, and I guess I was probably lucky. I don't think I was particularly brilliant in my strategy, but I played a pretty conservative game, I thought, and kind of ended up pulling out that win. But I kind of wish that I had felt more compelled to push my luck. I think that would have made it a little bit more exciting. Did you guys feel like you were doing that a lot?
I had to do it a couple times, and I sometimes maybe didn't push my luck, but pushed my engine a little bit harder than I should have, just to make sure that you guys, like, there was a little bit of a mind game, right? And that's what Flamme Rouge was all about, was like, hey, I'm hoping that they're going to move to this space so that I can get behind them and draft off them. And this game, again, it made it a little bit more interesting because you had the choice to say, if I push around that corner, he won't draft off me, but I'm going to burn half my engine to do that. And so I pushed my luck a couple times when it felt important, or when it didn't feel too risky, maybe a possibility of busting a little bit, but not too risky. And then I pushed my luck at the very end of the game, like last corner, just hoping not to get second place. Or not to get third place. I want to get second place. Pushed my luck, ended up costing me and pushing me into fourth place, which wasn't the end of the world. I didn't push my luck too much there, but there was some risks. I think enough risks to keep it fun.
I didn't get much of that push your luck type of excitement in this game at all, Chris. So I would have liked to have more opportunities to do that as well. I thought the first, 7/8 of the game was just all of us in a pile. Like, oh, the last place guy is going to come up and get right behind, and now he can draft if he wants to. And now we're all restarting, and we're pretty much in the same position that we were last turn. The draft thing seems cool in principle, but then why do it now if the guy in last place next time is just going to draft off you next time? So there was just a flip flop that you had to pay, heat for sometimes if you're in last to get that extra card or that extra bump. And then, so it seems cool in principle, but execution wise, you're just going to pass it back and forth, that little last place drafting tug of war, which it didn't work out to be too exciting for me.
I do want to point out though that you guys thought after like the first curve of the game that I was going to run away with the game, because I managed to get around the first curve a little bit, a turn before you all raced up ahead, and it looked like I had a good lead. But by the end of that track, everybody was pretty much caught up to me, and I ended up taking last place. Chris ended up with first on it, so it did feel like there was, for you guys, it seemed like you were concerned that there was no opportunity to come back, but some of you took chances and managed to pull that off. So maybe it didn't feel too risky to you, but I watched you guys do it. I was like, oh, if he does that, he could burn out, but he's doing it anyway. And dang it, he succeeded and caught up to me.
So again, why don't we just go to the last two turns and play from there if the whole first part of the game doesn't even make a difference?
Good point.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's jump in and talk about the theme and production of Downforce. And I'll just jump in and start here and just say that I think thematically the game has a lot going on that works really well. It feels like you're making some choices about you're shifting gears to the right position and cooling down your engine and pushing around the corners. All that stuff feels thematic. They're clearly, built the theme right into the game. And I really like the Vincent to Trait artwork on both the box, but also the board. We only played one board, kind of the recommended starter board tonight. And it was fun looking at this board with all the little artwork on it and everything. So from a production and theme perspective, I thought it was a pretty good hit.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. Production theme were fantastic, even up to game length. I feel like if I'm ever going to watch a NASCAR race, it seems like it lasts forever. And here, this game, I wanted it to last about 30 minutes, but I think we ended up playing for about 2.5 hours. And we were taking quick, snappy turns by the end of this thing. We weren't messing around. We were like, here's my cards, flip them over, here we go. But this game just kept going and going. And even we just did 2 laps. I don't know how many laps you're supposed to play. Anyway, yeah, production, I can't fault it at all. It does have some white border cards, Tim. I don't know how you feel about that.
Didn't even feel
but
it.
The player boards were neat. I thought the little actions going across as if they were little gauges in a car, in like the dash of a car. I thought that was a nice touch. Artwork on the board is fantastic. This overhead view. The cars were strangely disproportionate to the tiny little doves that were flying, and the people were microscopic. So I thought that was fun to play with. It's just a board game. So it's fun to play with these giant cars driving around and these microscopic people watching the huge, spaceship cars flying around the track. So other than those little funny nitpicks, the production is outstanding.
Well, other than the weird scaling aside on this one, I got to agree with everything you guys said. It's a fine, very pleasant game to look at. The art is really nice. I love that they did kind of a retro race car thing going on. I think it's set in the 60s, so it's kind of that era. The way that like you said, Adam, the player boards that look like a dashboard. And actually, one thing that I noticed, it was just a nice little fun touch. Each of us had a different little token on our dashboard. Like somebody had a 4-leaf clover sticky tape to their dashboard. I had a little handkerchief with lipstick marks on it. Somebody else had I don't know if it was like a bottle of hot sauce or something. I couldn't tell. It was something funny. But there was these neat little touches like that had this kind of old school retro car racing feel to it. The pieces on the board looked really fun. It actually, there's a number of times, I think both of us kind of, all of us kind of made jokes about, this feels like it should be on a slot car or, an old fashioned race car track like you had when you were a kid. And it has that feel to it. And I thought that feel made it really fun. You add together that nice production and the art. And I thought overall, this was an extremely pleasant game to play from a production standpoint. Other than I take some exception to the fact they make the USA look desolate in this one. And don't get me wrong, I love desert. I think desert is great, but man, it just, of all the places that you could go on this one, the different board sets that come with this, different tracks, the USA just isn't showing too well.
Yeah, I wonder if it's because it's in the 60s. Maybe that's what a Formula One track would have been. But I don't know. I watched the big race in like downtown Long Beach through the streets, and that was like a crowded city. Awesome to watch in a place like that. Chris, would you request to play this game again?
I think I might. I'm not sure. This was a fun game, but I think it suffered from a little bit too. it was a little bit too long for the payoff. Like, this is a game that we went into tonight saying, hey, we're going to play a couple of breezy, light racing games, and it's going to fly by. And the game ended up taking like 2.5 hours. And there was fun to be had there. There was neat things going on. There were strategic decisions to be made, and it was fun to look at, and it was fun to touch the pieces. But honestly, I feel like this game should have been half as long as it was. And maybe this, I don't want to spoiler alert that, when we were playing Downforce next, that was a short game. And this one felt like it should have been a lot shorter than it was. So I did have a lot of fun with it, but I'm not sure I want to spend another 2.5 hours playing this game, or even 2 hours playing this game, which is maybe more of like what it would be because we know the rules. So I think I'm gonna revise my answer. Rather than say yes, I would ask to play it again, I would enthusiastically agree to play the game again if somebody else asked for it, but I don't think I'm going to go out looking for it.
Yeah, that's pretty similar to how I feel about it. Like, I can't imagine going and I wouldn't buy it, and I can't imagine going and saying, hey, it's a game night, somebody bring Heat, I'm really excited to play it again. I just don't feel that way about it, but I thought it was a pretty fun time, and I'd be happy to play it again. I agree, I think it went too long. We played, Chris kept saying 2.5 hours. To be clear, we did finish almost exactly 2 hours, and that included a little bit of setup and a little bit of reteaching and stuff like that. So this is probably a 60 to 90 minute game if you got it down, if everybody knows how they're playing and ready to rush into it. But I felt like the first half of the game, the first lap was fun. I was having fun with the decisions. I was having fun. But then by the end of the second lap, I was bored with, it was redundant. It felt like you were doing the same thing. Oh, we're getting up to a corner again. Oh, great. I got to slow down so I can deal with this mess around here. And so the excitement of those first couple corners and the things that came out of them kind of lost their luster by the end of the first game. And that's pretty rough on a single gameplay. Now, this game does have some things that we didn't play with, right? It's got some advanced rules and variants like asymmetric deck building. You can kind of I think they call it the garage, where you can kind of build up your deck uniquely at the beginning of the game. That could add some fun to it that it wasn't here this time. There's different tracks to it and things like that. So I would be happy to try it out again if somebody wanted to play it. I did like it more than Flamme Rouge, which was nice because Flamme Rouge wasn't a bad game, but I felt like Flamme Rouge, you really didn't have any real agency in that game. This one, you did have a little bit of agency. There was some fun to be had with the decisions, but I probably wouldn't request to play it again. What about you, Adam?
I am with you guys. I might try it one or two more times. I want to see what these other modules are. I understand there's also a weather variant you can add that mixes up the tracks a little bit, add some variety to that, and these upgrades or whatever. Some of that stuff sounds kind of neat. See if it changes it up enough to make it a little more interesting. But base game here, I don't know. Maybe I'd go back and try it again just to see if I could. Yeah, you know what? My limited time and kids and schedule and sports and stuff. No, I'm not going to request to play this one again. I'm going to prioritize other stuff a little bit higher. In an ideal world where I didn't have to worry about stuff, I'd try it again, but I don't live in that world right now. So no, I am not going to request to play this one again.
Yeah, fair enough. It's interesting. This game it just came out like a few weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago. It's already at number 87 on the Board Game Geek top 100. So it seems like so far this year, this is like the big surprise, bust through hit. And it surprises me a little bit. The game just doesn't seem fun enough, in my opinion, to justify that. But, maybe it's sometimes it's that combination. Wingspan never felt fun enough for me as well, but somehow that managed to hit for a lot of people in a big way. So cool. Heat, Petal to the Metal. Well, let's jump into a description of Downforce.
In Downforce, players first take the role of race car bidders, I guess, then as race car manipulators, while simultaneously becoming racing bettors in this unique game of racing, speculation, and card management. To begin the game, between 2 and 6 players are dealt hands of cards which feature at least one race car color and a number associated with that color. After examining their hands, players then bid in millions of dollars using the color number combo for each of the 6 cars and their driver's special ability. Once all cars have been auctioned off, the race begins. In turn order, players now play a card and move the associated cars that many spaces towards the finish line, if possible. For example, Steve might play a card that says blue 6 and red 5. So he moves the blue car 6 spaces up to the single lane curve, and now the red car can only move 1 space because it's stuck behind the blue car. At 3 points during the race, bets on who will win also occur, with the first and most unpredictable bet being worth the most. and the final bet closer to the finish line being worth the least. Once all cards have finished or all players are out of cards, players sum their driver's winnings for placing, their winnings from their bets, and subtract the cost for their initial auctions. The player with the most cash is the winner. Downforce was designed by Rob Davio, Justin D. Jacobson, and Wolfgang Kramer, and was released in 2017 by Restoration Games.
All right, let's jump into gameplay and mechanisms of Downforce. So this was a game from just a few years ago. Restoration Games, I believe, brought back like an older game and kind of revisited it. And it was funny because when I was watching Rodney Smith's video on Downforce, it was a day after I watched Rodney Smith's video on Heat, Petal to the Metal, and he starts with the setup rules. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be the exact same game. But it's not. It's quite a bit different. But we're still going to compare the two today. So let's jump into the gameplay first, Chris.
Wow, what a different game this was. And to start with, let me just say this game felt wacky to me. It just felt like there was so many odd little things about it. And I don't mean odd bad. I mean, it was just like in Heat, it felt like you were playing a racing game. It was a straight racing. In this one, you start with bidding on cars. I mean, what? That was kind of wild. So you start out by bidding on these cars. And so in the end, you don't even know how many cars at the outset of the game. You don't know how many cars you're going to have. You might have one. You might have two. You might have 0 cars. That was actually one of the things that Rodney joked about in his video was you could theoretically play this game without having any cars whatsoever. And you better bet really well because then that's how you're going to make all your points. But you could play that without having any cars in the race. So, the bidding part I thought was both interesting and really impactful because you, of course, increase your chances of winning if you have more cars in the race, but you're also paying a lot for it. I think Adam ended up having 2 cars that were cumulatively cost about $12 million. And so, I think placed pretty well, but a lot of that money ended up getting sucked up. So before you even get to the racing part of the game, you're making some pretty big decisions about the structure of the point scoring to begin with. And I thought, I just want to focus on that for a minute because I thought that set things off on a very different note than Heat did.
It did. And at first, when I read the rules or watched Rodney's video on it and understood that, I was like, well, that's kind of dumb to put a bidding thing at the beginning of a light game. Nobody's going to know how they should bid on it. But it was actually a really fun decision. Not only are you bidding on the car, which it's going to have a different starting position, and you know what the starting position is at the beginning, but you're bidding on it based on the special power. So every car, as they get flipped over and you start the auction, they have a special power that's associated with it. So you're bidding on the power as well. But also you have your hand of like 10 cards in a 4-player game. It was 10 cards each that you're going to be using to race over the course of the game. And you know those in advance. You kind of know how successful can I be with this car based on the number, the numbers that match that color in my hand. So fun decisions to make right at the beginning. I loved it. I'd love it even more in a second play now that I know how the game plays out and could make some smarter decisions with it. But it was pretty cool because like Steve and Adam both won 2 cars each. Chris and I both won 1 car each. Chris and I took first. I took second. Steve and Adam took third and fourth. And in any case, having more cars didn't win you the game, even though they did really well. They were successful. Their cars placed well. But like Chris said, they spent a lot of money up front on them. So interesting choices there. I would see in the next game with the 4 of us playing, people would not be bidding $6 million on each of them. So you might get some deals. You might end up with 2 cars at $2 or $3 million each because you know a little bit better about the value of them and the economy of it. So really fun decision to start there, Chris. Totally agree with you.
Yeah, that auction to open up the game, I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, haha, $6 million. I got the red. I got the pretty colors. So I'm doing great here. No, that was not so wise. But what you could do is parlay the power that you get from one of those 2 cars. How are you going to work that power together to get yourself an advantage? So Tim mentioned these little unique powers that come with each of these cars. Mine was if you're along the rumble strips at the end of the turn, then you get to move an extra 2 spots. Tim could cut through these diagonal spots and do some cool things. Steve, once you cross the bet line, you got to do a move an extra 2 space. So some interesting little quirky powers that came with each of these cars that I thought added a nice twist to the game. But yeah, that opening auction, to come back to that, didn't really know what was going on there on the first play. Like, I don't know how this is going to work. You're telling me I have to bid on stuff? I don't know how this game even works. What am I bidding on exactly? So on the first play, whoopsie, Made some mistakes right off the bat, but yeah, you learn from that. And going back into it, like you said, Tim, a second time, I tried to do that a little savvier and with a little more awareness of what's going on. So that opening auction was cool. Next, I want to talk about just the card play and positioning of the cards. That was so fun to me. Get in these corners, everybody's in a log jam. What a perfect time to play this card where the green car can move 6, but guess what? He's right behind the yellow car that can't move. So the green car's not going anywhere. Now I'm going to be able to move my blue car 4 spaces and catch up and get him in the logjam too, blocking out everybody else. So some really fun card play dynamics where, again, I was like, how am I ever going to use this card to my advantage? Well, you start seeing that as the game goes on and Steve sees the black 6 just get wasted away. And he's like, oh, I could have had that 6 extra spots for my car. Now it just gets trashed because my car can't move anywhere. It's all jammed up. So some fun card play dynamics here. I like that a lot.
This was another area where this game was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. When I first saw that mechanic, I'm like, oh, okay, ho-hum. I'm going to play a card. It's going to let me move a bunch of different cards, my cars as well as the other cars. But so what? But like Adam said, there were ways to game this thing where you could really hose other people. And it was a pretty cutthroat game. I mean, it seemed like half of the time we were trying to like jam each other into corners so that you couldn't get by anybody. Because unlike Heat, you couldn't move through other cars here. You could get blocked by other cars, especially in the couple of corners where there was only one space wide in the track. And so if one person was jammed up in there, everybody behind him was going to get jammed up. And so I think I must have played 3 or 4 cards that had high numbers for all the other cars that were on the board, and not a single one of them got to move. And that just also highlights another broader strategic thing about the card play here. It's that desire you're going to have a lot of times, at least I did, in a first play, was to get out there and just start moving really fast, play those big cards and get them moving. But ultimately, you're going to have to play all or most of your cards, which means you may have a bunch of cards with your color on it and even high numbers, but you're also going to have a bunch that don't. So the trick is going to be figuring out when is the time to play those higher card numbers with the other cars. And I feel like I'm saying cars and cards, and it's hard to tell which one I'm talking about. But you have to play the cards that let you move the other cars. So you try to do that when they can't actually move. So there's these little strategy pieces in there that I think having a second or third game of this, when we kind of really get the strategy behind it, it would get more cutthroat even than it was this game. And it would be even more fun.
And the key here that we haven't even talked about is that you're not just racing your car and moving playing the cards that are going to make your car move forward. It's that at 3 points during the race, you're going to bet on which car is going to win. And that's where the real fun came for me, because making all these decisions was great, but it was even more interesting when, hey, my car is stuck there, but I bet, on red in the first round. So at least I'm going to push red forward and hope that they win. And so I'm kind of cheering for the other people's cars, even if I'm not going to win, even if they're going to get points for getting it across the finish line. So I thought there was some just really cool, simple elements here that made every choice tough but fun. And it was always fun right to the end. My car didn't even pass. I had one car in the race and it didn't even finish the race. I was the only person without a finishing race. And I still took second in the game because I got some very smart or lucky bets in on here. And I really enjoyed that part of it as well.
I think the betting is the key here, Tim. You nailed it. There's these 3 bets as you go. And the first bet happens early in the game, and that one's worth more if you call it right. And the second bet is worth a little bit less. The third bet worth a little bit less because you have a better idea of who's going to come across the finish line first. I thought that was just incredibly fun, those bets at the different points in the game and trying to get some of your money back that you wasted on that early auction. It was just a pretty neat way to do that. So that's it, right? You got the auction, you got the bets, you got the
that's it.
And then hosing people on their cars. These simple mechanisms made for a very fun, fantastic game.
But a really fun thing that happened in our game. So Steve had the black car, and he crosses the third bet line with the black car, and he's way in the lead. Mm-hmm. And of course, everybody bets on black as the number one car there. And so we're all joking like, okay, well, I guess everybody's going to get $3,000 going into this last round. He'd pushed black so much, and everybody had that black ran out of card. Like nobody had any cards to play black at the end. So red and blue, or red and green, ended up passing him, which were my two early bets. So everybody only got $1,000 on betting on black in the third round.
Yeah.
It led to some surprises. Like it looked like black was for sure going to take that race, and they, third place may have not even passed over it. So really fun choices here.
One thing that this game kind of really highlighted to me, especially thinking about it afterwards now, is that in subsequent plays, I think I would really have a good time trying some really unorthodox ways of winning. The biggest point scoring thing that you can do is to win a race. I won the race and got $12 million. It was the single biggest thing you could do. But betting right on some of the betting parts got you 9 million, 6 million, 5 million, and there's 3 opportunities to do that. So there is a bunch of different ways you could win money and points here. So you could go into this with one car and not even try to win the race, but just to try to get yourself in second or third or fourth, maybe get a little bit of money, but really manipulate who does win the race. And I don't know. I just think that would be, I don't know if it would work. It's sort of like going full Loki in Blood Rage. Can you really win the game by losing a whole bunch of battles? I don't know.
We never have.
But it's fun to try sometimes. And I think this game has got some potential strategies like that I would like to try.
Yeah, and I think even don't play no cards moving your car at the beginning of the race, and then let everyone get blocked up, and then all of a sudden yours is the only one that's moving through, catching up to that. That's what happened in this race. I forget which car, blue, I think, was didn't even start the race until everyone else was halfway through, and then we all get that choke point, and then blue's right behind them.
And it's ridiculous, right? One car's just sitting at the starting line while all the other cars are at turn 3.
They could get their starter work.
Big problems with theme here, clearly.
No, it's like that Boon to Eve pod race in Star Wars Episode 1 where he couldn't get his pod racer started at the beginning, but he still ended up winning it. I mean, Anakin Skywalker was driving that blue car.
Totally, that's what I was thinking.
Clearly what the designers had in mind here, I'm sure.
A great analogy.
Right,
yeah, great analogy.
Really nerded out on that one.
Deep cut.
Let's talk about the theme and production of Downforce.
This one, it had, I think, some more fun pieces than Heat did, but the production wasn't quite as exciting. Then again, I'm not sure the production needed to be as exciting. This is a light, breezy game. It had light, breezy production. There wasn't much in the way of, different pictures on the cards, and you basically had, some very basic kind of cartoony. What the art on this one, the board and all the different pieces actually reminded me of was, for anybody who has little kids, those Playmobil play sets, like, Thomas the Tank Engine and stuff like that. And that was fine here. It wasn't bad. It was not exciting, but it was perfectly pleasant and serviceable. And for a game of this weight, I don't begrudge them that. And it does have nice, neat little cars. I'm not sure. I had to look at the picture to see. Can you guys, either of you guys, have you seen the actual cars that you're using? Are they little plastic cars or?
Yeah, they're plastic cars with just, I think their wheels move. They look like little kind of cheap, cheap,
flimsy plastic cars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something you
dollar store cars.
Right, exactly. So
yeah.
Pull out of a stocking.
All right. Christmas. Well, dollar store stocking cars. So not stock cars, stocking cars. So no great shakes with the production, but it didn't detract from the game. It didn't really add anything either.
Yeah, totally agree on this. The production is almost a little bit of a letdown, I would say. But, I like the artwork on Heat better. The cars were pretty similar, but the production wasn't the star of this particular game. So I'll give it a little bit of leeway. I would have liked better board artwork, something that was a little bit more interesting as far as board artwork and card artwork, but it was fine.
I think the production almost adds to the silliness of the game. It is like one of those farm kid playmat things where you get the little animals, and then my little 2-year-old moves her little piggies over here, and there's train tracks going into nowhere. There's these little fountains on a pond that, why would there be fountains there? There's just a pond. Well, I guess it is a racetrack. So yeah. And then there's some houses around there's a pastoral horse ranch on the southern. These horses have to be angry. All these cars are racing around the whole time. So I don't know what's going on there. If you look into it a little more, I thought its cheesiness is just right. The cars are like these, like I said, these dollar store cars. The star of the year is not the production. It's the gameplay, the betting, and the silly funness you're going to have racing these cars around the track.
Hey, Adam, you just said something that I feel like I have to comment on now because I thought I was the only one who noticed it. But what's up with that weird railroad to nowhere? In the middle
You
of this,
pointed that out.
in the middle of this racetrack, there's like this peninsula out into this lake or something, and there's a little forest, and there's a one-way railroad that goes from somewhere off camera into the middle of this forest and then just stops.
It's the end of the line out there.
An end of the line. I have no idea what to make of that, but it was a little bit odd.
Yeah, and then there's this residential housing on the southeast corner of this track. So, I mean, those guys' property value has to be just gone down the tubes.
Nobody wants to live there. Nobody wants to live there.
This race only happens once a year. It's a big spectacle. They sell seats on their front porch. They're fine.
They rent them out. Yeah.
Final question on this one: would you request to play it again? And then just you can finish off with your comparison to Heat.
I would definitely ask to play this game again. It was odd and interesting, and I feel like we only scratched the surface of this game. I feel like at the start of it, I was kind of like, okay, maybe. By the end of it, I was excited by this game. I loved playing those cards. I loved seeing these little ways that you could hose your neighbor. I thought that was a lot of fun, and it was breezy. It went quick. I think it took us about an hour, a little bit less than an hour, and that was with figuring out rules and things like that. It was the stuff that I wished Heat was more like. Heat was definitely a deeper game. I mean, there was more stuff going on. There was more thinking happening, I think. The production was bigger, but it still ended up feeling a little bit too big for what the game actually was in terms of time. The balance was struck much better in Downforce than it was in Heat. In Downforce, I do want to explore those strategies. I want to dig in there a little bit and see what you can do. And I don't have to invest hours and hours in playing this. This would be a great filler game, for between a couple of, like, for example, I would love to see this one, somebody get this and have this show up at our next BGHT Con when we're tired of playing big, heavy, multi-hour games and we want something fun. This would be a great game to pull out for that. So heartily support Downforce. I thought Heat was interesting. I thought it was fun. I had a good time. But like Tim said, by the end of it, I kind of felt like I was doing the same thing over and over again. And it just didn't capture me. So in the race of the big race games tonight, the clear winner to me was Downforce. Period.
I would also request to play Downforce again. I've always been a little intrigued by this game, but car racing isn't a theme that really gets me excited. But I do like the concept of racing games. And I've had a few that I've enjoyed in the past. I've talked about Jamaica before as a racing game with a little bit of strategy in it. I've talked about Camel Up, which is a silly, light betting racing game. And this leans more on the spectrum of Camel Up as a game that you can teach somebody in 2 minutes. You're out and playing, you're done with it in 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and it's kind of just light fun. People laughing, that silly thing happened. But there's a little more control here than Camel Up versus my last few plays teaching new players Jamaica. It just hasn't been as big of a hit as I remembered it being when I first learned the game. And so I think Downforce for that light family weight racing game, this is probably my favorite one at this point. Like, I think this could replace Jamaica in my collection because why would I pull that out again when I've got this other fun light game I can teach people and we can jump in and have a fun, raucous time with the exception of the betting on the cars at the beginning of the game. If you're going to teach this to new gamers, it's one thing that you're like have to coach them through or they're going to just fail at it and hate you for it. But then you set it up and play it again for 45 minutes. So I really like Downforce. A lot of fun here. I know there's other tracks that come in the board would be fun. I don't know how much they change anything. Maybe, more obstacles, choke points, who knows. But yeah, wow, this game was a blast. It was a lot of fun. So let's talk about Heat a little bit. In comparison, Heat definitely had some more strategy going on, but it outstayed its welcome, where Downforce didn't at all. Downforce ended exactly when you wanted it to end. It was like, wow, we're already to the third betting line. Great. Oh, somebody just finished. Well, there's 2 more turns and it's all over. It was fun. It was exactly the right amount of time. I feel like if Heat had lasted the same amount of time as this, I probably would have enjoyed it even more. But then, of course, there was more strategic choice there you couldn't have planned as well. So I can understand why they made it into a 2-lap game, or as long as it was. I would pick this over Heat, though, for sure. This is a game I would ask for. Heat is a game I wouldn't mind playing. How long would that last? I don't know. After you play a game like this that's light and kind of just silly fun a few times, and there's not a lot to explore with it, do you still have fun with it? There are some games that have lasted for me. I feel like this could be one of them. So this is a game I probably will keep an eye out for. If I find it on sale, find it at the seller's market and get it used or whatever, I'll probably pick this up, and I think it could replace one or two, kind of family weight light party games. Plays to 6 players, but you can play it any number of players because you just bid on all those cards. You can play this 2 players and still have a time with it, I think, because you still have all 6 cars in the race. So I think this is a versatile, fun, light game. And hey, why are we gaming? We're gaming to have fun. So yeah, this game really gets my engine running.
I'm with you guys. I would totally request to play Downforce again and again and again. You guys said it all. I had so much fun playing this. I didn't think that would be that great. I see it all the time at, like, I think it's at Barnes & Noble. I don't know if it's at Target. It's everywhere. Everywhere I look, I see Downforce, and I think it's pretty cheap. Like, it's on sale. I think they're trying to get rid of this thing. I need to go pick one of these up for $20-$30, whatever it is. It's like almost like a stock game in disguise a little bit. I don't want to ruin anybody's fun. It's a racing game. Don't think about it as stocks. You're not trying to buy stocks in it. Don't think about that. To compare it with Heat, I think Heat, out of all the racing games I've ever played, which is like 3, this one and Cubitos, aka Cubitos, and this game itself, Downforce, I think Heat felt like a racing game with your shifting and managing your engine temperature and going to the curves and trying to slow down. And it did feel, I don't know, I guess it felt like racing. Not really. It felt more like racing than anything else I've played. I'll say that. But that's not necessarily what I'm looking for. Like I said, it's long. You guys said it too. It's a long game. It got repetitive for me. There wasn't too much excitement there. 2 totally different feels for me too. That neither game felt like the other one, except that there are cars going around a track. That's about it as far as similarities go. Otherwise, I much prefer Downforce.
All right. Well, that will wrap up this episode, except we have a few reviews to go over today. I want to give a shout out to some listeners who were nice enough to leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts. If you love the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Now, we have 85 reviews on Apple Podcasts in the United States. We have around 4,000 to 5,000 listens per week on the show. So a few of you have not rated us. Now, I know you don't all use Apple Podcasts, but I think a lot of you do it. 52% of you do, according to the stats I get. Please stop and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. But we got a few great ones this week, so let's give them a shout out. So the first review was from Random Asian. He gave us a 5-star review, and the headline was "Great Takes." And by the way, that was just the username on Apple Podcasts. I didn't just call someone Random Asian. His review said, "Just love the show. Keep up the content. It's great that the hosts and guests all enjoy a variety of games, but are passionate about what they like and respect each other's preferences. Love the variety of games that they try out: Euros, Battle, Epic 4X, older games, newer releases, engine builders, etc. They offer fantastic perspectives on mechanisms or themes. Really enjoy hearing about the semi-annual cons, all the top lists that help either pull me or push me over the edge to try out games. Great board game podcast with the focus on the games and not any nonsense filler. Thanks so much and keep it up." Well, thank you, Random Asian. That was wonderful to hear. And I feel like you just hit all of the marks of what we're trying to do with this show.
That feels nice.
That was great.
The next review came from Jay Greeny 34, and the headline was "Just like hanging out with good friends, 5 stars. I've been looking for a podcast to fill a board gaming hole I've had since the Dice Tower went away, and I stumbled on this podcast. Early on, I found myself cherry picking top lists or favorite games of mine. Now that I've gotten to know the hosts and the personalities of everyone better, I'm finding myself going back through all the older episodes I skipped, as well as re-listening to others in more context. Just found out Steve and Tim are brothers after listening to like 50 episodes. Oops. Well, I may not agree with every review. Root. I love listening to a good group of friends. Did you get that? I had to exaggerate the 2 questions.
Oh, yeah.
Put on the end of that.
If you don't speak Midwest United States, Tim just said root. Is what he was trying to say.
I love listening to a good group of friends who just love hanging out and playing board games together. The podcast has helped me discover some games I otherwise would have let slip through the cracks, and the BGHT convention recaps are a personal favorite. Just an absolutely fun hang every week. Oh, thanks, JGreeny34. That was really nice to hear.
It's great.
Now I have one last final review that's really important because this is a regular listener and contributor to the show, and his name is Marco Stefano. And a while ago, he's like, hey, I'm moved back to Italy and I want the Italian board game community to find out about you guys. So I left you a review on Apple Podcasts, but we never read it on the show. And it's because it wasn't showing up for me on any of the lists that I get from Italian board game podcasts. But I think it's because he had it in Italian. And so everything I'm getting is in English. So he translated it for me. And he went ahead and sent me the translation on it. So here's what he said on Apple Podcasts in Italy. Hands down, BGHT is one of the best board gaming podcasts around. A bunch of friends with honest opinions share their genuine passion for board gaming. Each episode is a true delight, and the best part is that Tim, Adam, and Chris do not always agree, thus bringing interesting, multifaceted conversations to the table. If you're looking for a transparent and easygoing but thoughtful review of your potential next game to pick, Board Game Hot Takes is the right place to go.
Thanks, Marco.
I didn't notice that Marco called me out first in that list of 3 people. So I feel like I get a vote.
Dude,
on that.
I don't even have a vote yet. You don't get all the votes.
That's a stretch.
No, you're right. Chris, he ended with you. I think that's your vote.
I think you saved the best. You did the best for last.
All these reviews are saying we have like unique, diverse views. Not tonight. We're just like, yep.
Exactly what you said. I was thinking that too. Yeah.
Totally. Anyway, Marco, thank you so much for the review and sending the translation to me. Also, love hanging out and chat with you on Twitter and again, appreciate you being part of our community.
Thanks, Marco. It's a delight reading your posts. Thanks for hanging with us and putting out the content you put out. I always enjoy reading your posts.
Agreed.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. And we'll be back next week with some more fun game conversations. And then right after next week's episode on another hot take review, we're going to be starting off our top 40 games of all time, a full month of our top 40 games. So you have that to look forward to if that's something you're into. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.